Callum and I will have some fun with the wines and talking about them to you. Do use the chat facility to interact with us and say hello and give us a little wave and that sort of thing. Ask any questions or make any comments as you're going along. We've got some really nice wines this evening here to go through. How are you? How are you tonight, Callum?
Yeah, not bad, Tim. Not bad. Busy week. Same for you. I know.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, not bad. I've tasted the wines. They're all showing really well. So looking forward to it.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on the last few people to come in. Meanwhile, let's make a little start on this evening. So this evening we have Big Bold Reds. It's our I lost count of how many virtual wine tastings we've done now, but it's certainly the new normal for us. So I hope that you're enjoying them as much as we are enjoying putting them together for you. Before we start, I'm going to hand over to Callum. He's going to tell you a little bit about what we do here at Nichols and Perks, and then I'll talk a little bit about the generic type of wine that we've got this evening, and then we'll kick off. What I'd like to suggest you do, if you haven't already, is to open your wines up, because they will improve with a little bit of aeration and breathing. So get those open now, and Callum, over to you, and let's have a little lesson on what you do at Nichols and Perks.
Cheers, Tim. So hi everyone, my name is Callum Gardner. I'm a member of the fine wine team at Nichols and Perks. So it's great to see some familiar faces this evening, but there are actually some new faces. So I thought we'd begin by telling you a bit about the company that Tim and I work for. Now, we're located in Stourbridge, a small town in the West Midlands. We're actually one of the oldest wine and spirit merchants in the UK, in fact the world, dating back to 1797, when William Nichols first began trading as a grocer, a druggist and a wine spirit merchant. Now, the company's been in my family since the mid-40s, 1945 to be exact, when it was purchased by my great-grandfather, William Gardner. They are now members of the fourth and third generation at the helm, with myself a member of the fourth generation. Now, with regards to the business, there are a lot of different aspects and layers to the business, but we are predominantly fine wine and spirit specialists, with a keen focus on the wines of France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. However, we do offer wines from all over the world, and I'm pleased to say that we exported to over 50 different countries worldwide last year, which is great. Now, as well as offering fine wine to private customers like yourselves and other members of the trade, we also offer wines to the on-trade, so Michelin-star restaurants, for example. We offer a fine wine investment program. We sell wines as futures or en primeur, and we actually host 100 or over 100 different wine and spirit events, probably more these days with the virtual tastings every year. Now, it's enough about N&P. I'm going to pass you back to Tim. He's going to warm us up and get us going for this evening. Over to you, Tim.
The warm-up act. I see. A funny thing happened to me on the way to work today, but it usually does. Okay. Right, tasting. 1, 2, 1, 2. Let's talk a little bit about what makes a red wine bold. Well, there's 3 primary ingredients that will make a red wine bold. That's colour, to make it red, tannin, to give it the sort of grip and body, and alcohol, to give it that kick. So some red wines will tend to have more pigment in than others, and some will have a little bit more tannin than others. So I thought it'd be a useful thing just to kind of touch base on what that actually is and where it comes from. The pigment in red wine actually comes from the skins. If you take a red wine grape and cut it in 2, you'll see that the flesh is actually not red at all. It's the same as a white grape, a sort of pale colour. The skin itself contains the substance called anthocyanin, which is the pigment which will create a sort of bluish purple colour in young wines, softening to a sort of slightly more burgundy colour over the years. The other thing that you get from the skins is tannin, and tannin's an interesting sort of substance. It gives you, when you're sipping a full-bodied red wine with a fair amount of tannin in, it'll give you that slightly drying sensation around your gums. tannin is present in lots of plants and vegetables and fruit, so it's a natural thing. With wine, it helps complete the structure and keeps it stable over a period of time when it's still maturing and developing. So when you try these wines, give them a nice swirl in the glass, let the wine open up a little bit. Here's one I prepared earlier, and use your nose. As you probably know, the nose feeds a lot more information about the different aromas and tastes into your brain than your mere tongue. So you get lots and lots of information, which is why you see people bury their nose in the wine and give it a good old sniff. Okay, so just moving on then, without freaking you out too much. This isn't a chemistry lesson, but I thought what is interesting is to see the relative propensity of the compounds there. So the most prevalent item is water, typically about 86% water. Then you've got from 12 to about 14% alcohol or ethanol, a little bit of glycerol there. And then the things that give it the flavors are only amounting to less than 1%. So that's sort of quite interesting. There's over 1,000 different components typically to wine, and it's those trace amounts of these tannins, phenolics and other compounds that give the complexity of the flavor. So in order to get the texture and the flavors and the color, you need to extract. So this is something that Callum and I will talk about in terms of the wine production for the different producers over this evening. Typically, you can get a lot more tannin out of thick-skinned grapes like Syrah, Malbec, Mourvèdre, Cabernet Sauvignon. And in fact, just to kind of give your brain a rest and look at something a little easier to compare, there's the tannin levels of red grapes by comparison. And as you can see, the Merlot, Malbec, Syrah or Shiraz, Sangiovese, Cabernet Sauvignon, those are the sort of grapes that will tend to lend themselves to being what we call full-bodied. Okay, so one last little thing. Drinking red wine can stain your lips and tongue, and it may be a little bit of a turn off for some people, of course. You'll find that when you've drunk red wine, your lips and maybe your tongue and your teeth will tend to go dark purple, almost black sometimes. Certainly if you drink it in the evening and then you brush your teeth and you rinse out, you'll see this amazing color in your sink. So why does it do that when the actual color is red? Well, the reason is that wine is acidic and your saliva is alkaline. So wine has a low pH and your mouth has a higher pH. And that is what's responsible for turning the color from red to black, quite simply. You could try this in the privacy of your own home with an experiment. I wouldn't use any of the wines we've got here tonight. Go to Tesco and buy something cheap and nasty. And then add some lemon juice to the red wine and it'll look brighter and redder. And if you add a pinch of baking powder or bicarbonate of soda to the same sort of wine, it'll turn blacker. So that's a little experiment. So the anthocyanins, there they are. They come from the skins along with the tannin. Anthocyanins are seen as good things because they are antioxidant. And many people have suggested there's a lot of health benefits, but in general, the amount of wine you'd have to drink to get a sort of medicinally useful dose of antioxidants would probably render your liver incapable of functioning properly. So yeah, they're quite good in quantities, but you don't get them in huge quantities in wine. But it's not a bad excuse. You also get some things in dark chocolate, which do the same sort of thing. So a nicely balanced, healthy diet is red wine and dark chocolate. Okay, so let's move on. It's about time that we had some wine. So first wine we've got this evening, there you can see a map of Spain. It comes from the region called the Ribera del Duero, and it's just north of Madrid, between La Rioja and Madrid itself. So I think there's a little arrow which will show you the region. It's becoming quite a popular region now, and in fact the quality of the wines that you're getting from this region are really increasing a lot. Quick overview there, it has a relatively moderate to low rainfall, and it's exposed to some quite extreme temperatures. You get very hot, dry summers with temperatures up to about 40 degrees C, and hard winters during which you can get close to freezing temperatures. So this gives an enormous, what we call the diurnal variation. That's a marked difference between the highest and the lowest temperature. That can be helpful in terms of wine production, because you don't want grapes to ripen too quickly, but you do need them to get enough sun and enough heat to get the sugar produced in the grapes, and the phenolic ripeness, which gives it the fruitiness and the little bit of sweetness to balance with the acidity. Cool temperatures will preserve the acidity, so an ideal kind of climate is one where you've got enough warmth and sun to ripen the grapes, and enough moderate and cooling temperature to slow the growing season down, so it gets a nice balance. Okay, so with a couple of thousand or more hours a year, you've got lots of sun, so you need grapes with nice thick skins. So let's have a look at the region itself then. Biggest grape that is used in this region is Tempranillo, and this wine that we're going to taste now is a nice big bold textured Tempranillo. It's got an interesting sort of old world sensibility about the production, lots of tradition, but embracing newer techniques in terms of temperature control, stainless steel in terms of the maceration and fermentation as well. So it's a nice balance between old world and new world style. The designation of origin was produced about 1982, so it's not a very, very old region, but they're developing their tradition. Originally, it was a lot of growers selling grapes to co-ops and then producing bulk produced wine, but a small number initially of local growers saw the potential for the area and applied for the designation of origin recognition, and it's grown very rapidly, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years. And in fact, some producers have up sticks from the nearby Rioja region and decamped to Ribera del Duero, where they say, well, the qualities of the wines are on average a little bit better and better appreciated. So a region that's about 100 kilometers or so long, runs along the River Duero, got a mix of different soils and exposures and elevation, sometimes about half a mile or 700 or 800 meters above sea level. That gives the semi-arid terrain the extreme temperature variation that we talked about a little bit earlier on. So let's have a go at the wine then. I think the first thing you notice about it, you've got that lovely, rich sort of aroma, which is very reminiscent of Tempranillo. Incidentally, this is a Crianza wine. You've got several different characteristics in terms of the aging, and for Crianza, it's got to have a couple of years maturation, of which at least 1 year has got to be in oak. So the reserve wines have to be aged at least 3 years, incidentally, with at least 12 months in oak. Grand Reserva labelled wines must spend at least 5 years aging prior to release, 2 of which are in oak. So the grapes for this wine come from hand-picked, rigorous selection of very low-yielding old vines. Those of us who've been to our tastings before will know that when we talk about old vines, low-yielding, the old vines have to dig down really deep to get to their nutrients and the moisture they require. Older vines produce less, but the flavours are much more concentrated. So this area, located in the highlands of the central plateau, is just great for this type of wine. So once it's been fermented and macerated, we undergo what's called a malolactic fermentation in French oak barrels. Malolactic fermentation tends to soften the wine a little bit. You start off with malic acid in the fermentation process as a natural byproduct, and that is reminiscent of kind of green apples, quite tart. Some winemakers will deliberately make a little change of that, and it undergoes a process called malolactic fermentation, where the malic acid is changed to lactic acid. Lactic acid is a lot kind of creamier and softer on the palate. That's a style thing. Once it's been fermented, aged for about 14 months in oak barrels in the underground cellars there, which have a lovely constant temperature of about 14 degrees. So it's nice and gentle maturation process. And then we produce a lovely kind of soft wine, fairly full-bodied. It's drinking well. What I recommend you guys do is have a sip of the wine first of all, and then you'll have seen a few suggested food pairings. And if you try the wine first by itself and try a little bit of food, and then try the wine again afterwards and see how it changes. The reason is that the tannins that we talked about before will combine with protein in the food, whether it's perhaps meat or cheese, and the protein binding with the tannin will kind of cleanse the palate a bit and soften the overall sensation. So it'll be interesting to see what you guys think about that. I'll tell you what Decanter thought about it. They awarded this 92 points, which is a terrific score for a moderately priced wine. Lots of kind of smokiness there as well coming through. You can get aromas of things like figs, herbs, touch of licorice perhaps, and that sweet spice, a sort of cedar and maybe a little bit of cinnamon that you get from the judicious use of oak. What do you think of that one, Cal?
I love it too. My samples disappearing rather quickly. What stands out for me in this wine, I mean, I love the nose. It's quite perfumed. I get, you know, like kind of crushed rose petals, but Morello cherries all just jumping out the glass.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I think it's probably been 6 months actually since I've tasted this wine, and it's actually showing better now. So it's aging really well and will do so for a few years yet. But I think, yeah, why wait? Drink it now. Really good. Really good, yeah.
Yeah. So what does everyone think? Do use the chat facilities to let us know. What are you folk out there using to match with this wine out of the food suggestions, or indeed your own? Nothing is carved in tablets of stone. So do let us know what your do type on the chat and let us know what you're matching it with, and indeed what you think about the wine. Meanwhile, I think it's time for a little poll. What do you think, Cal? Right, let's have a look. Okay, those of you who have endured polls before will know that we don't take this particular part of the presentation terribly seriously. It's a little bit of light relief. So, as we were in Spain, Viva España was the well-known single, which was first released in what language? Spanish, French, German, Italian, Dutch, or indeed English? So don't be shy. There are no prizes and no punishments. We've got a better turnout than at the general election. The 3/4 of you have voted. I'm going to count down now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Well, the majority of you thought that the Viva España was first released in English. I'm going to disappoint you, and I've fooled you all again, because it was first released in the early 1970s in Dutch. How about that? I knew you wanted to know that, so there we go. Right, with that little bit of light relief, I'm now going to hand back to Cal, who's going to tell us a little bit about his wine.
Here's Tim. So the second wine of the evening is the 2016 Clos de Menou, which is from one of the most famous appellations in the world, Saint-Emilion. Now, Saint-Emilion is located on the right bank of Bordeaux, as you'll see on the map there in blue. Yeah, so it's located just east of Pomerol, another famous appellation you may know, and it's home to not only some of the finest chateaux and wines in the world, but also some of the most expensive. Now, you have Chateau Cheval Blanc, you see in a second.
Ta-da!
There you go.
Ozone.
Chateau Ozone, Angelus, and Pavie, to name a few. Now, to put it into context, Cheval Blanc was recently released, the 2009 vintage, en primeur at £2,250 per 6 bottles, and that's before duty and VAT. So, you know, the top wines from Saint-Emilion, they command extremely high prices. Now, with regards to the history of Saint-Emilion, the Romans planted vineyards in what was to become Saint-Emilion as early as the 2nd century. It was actually previously known as Ascumbus, but was renamed after, yes, you guessed it, Tim,
a monk.
after a Breton monk, Emilion. Now, he was a travelling confessor, and he settled in a hermitage carved into rock in Saint-Emilion in the 8th century. It was actually the monks that followed him that started the commercial wine production in the area. Now, the town's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and, you know, it has fascinating Romanesque churches and ruins that stretch all along its steep and narrow streets. If you've never been, you must. It's fantastic. Now, you'll see that map in front of you. If we go back to that map, Tim. There you go. Now, this is a map of the Libournais department in the right bank of Bordeaux. You'll be able to see Saint-Emilion just in the centre there. Now, the climate of Saint-Emilion is what we call a maritime climate. Now, being close to the Atlantic Ocean to the west, has damp spring times, rather hot, fairly dry summers, mild winters, and quite a bit of rain during autumn and winter. Now, the Atlantic Ocean and the rivers in and around Bordeaux and Saint-Emilion act as heat moderators and actually aid the ripening of the grapes grown here, which is very, very important and very important to Bordeaux. Now, the soils of Saint-Emilion, they're comprised of limestone, which is free draining, retains heat, and gives finesse and freshness to a wine. Also clay and loam, so these are very good water retention, adds richness to a wine. You also have sandstone, which is known as molasses du Fronceday, and these are free draining and give power and rusticity to a wine. So yeah, as I mentioned, all of these contribute immensely to the Merlot, Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon that's grown in Saint-Emilion. Now, interestingly, Saint-Emilion actually has 4 satellite areas. You have Lussac Saint-Emilion, Saint-Georges Saint-Emilion, Puisigan Saint-Emilion and Mantogne Saint-Emilion. Now, what these do, they cover distinct, slightly smaller areas immediately northeast of Saint-Emilion, and each has its own independent appellation title. Now, it's similar to Lalande de Pomerol, which I mentioned at our Bordeaux tasting a few weeks back. Now, with regards to quality classification, Saint-Emilion proper has a tiered quality system. So you have Saint-Emilion AOC, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé AOC, and to confuse matters, you then have Saint-Emilion Premier Grand Cru Class B, and then Saint-Emilion Premier Grand Cru Class A. It's the very top ones are from. Now, the classification of this one we're tasting now is Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Class A, and the producer is, of course, Clos de Menou. There's the label. Just have a little taste of this wine before we carry on. Now, Nichols and Perks have been working directly with Clos de Menou, which is actually located in the heart of Saint-Emilion since the fantastic 2009 vintage. But its history actually dates back as far as 1538. Now, the domain's recent history dates back to 1956, when it was purchased by the really influential Bordeaux family, the Rivière family. Now, ever since this date, the winery really has gone from strength to strength, and there are many events that mark the life of the estate. For example, expanding vineyard area, so buying up vineyards, the construction of the new wine cellar, of course, and the creation of the premises of cultivation in 2001, just to name a few. Now, the vineyards that make up 25 hectares is planted to 85% Merlot, 10% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 5% Cabernet Franc. Now, the vintage of this wine is 2016. from 2016 in Saint-Emilion and in Bordeaux as a whole was truly exceptional. Some would say the best ever, and to be honest, I'd find that difficult to disagree with. I remember travelling to Bordeaux in the spring of 2017 to taste the 16 vintage, and to put it simply, I was actually blown away. It was amazing. For me, it's a vintage that is refined, sophisticated, one that has beguiling balance between richness, ripeness, and freshness. A bit like my colleague Tim. Hey, Tim.
Hey, there you go.
But in all seriousness, 2016 it displays like an unmistakable energy, which I also always find, tasting blind, I think it's really, really impressive. Now, I've actually got a quote here, to quote leading Bordeaux critic Neil Martin on 2016 vintage. Now, he says, see it up on the screen in a minute, 2016 Bordeaux wines are the DBs, the dog's bollocks, excuse my French, but I think that says it all. It's really, really great vintage.
He's a sophisticated and erudite chap.
Yeah, he is. He really is. Now, with regards to the winemaking of this wine, grapes are hand harvested, sorted, destemmed, placed in stainless steel tanks where it undergoes an alcoholic fermentation and maturation with remontage or pumping over. What this does is allow the extraction of colour and tannin, which is actually crucial to the overall flavour development and structure of the final wine, which Tim alluded to previously. Now, after this is complete, the malolactic fermentation occurs, which again Tim mentioned. Then once this is complete, the wines are blended and then aged for 18 months in oak barriques in Clos de Menou medieval cellars. Now, the final blend of this wine in front of you, the 16, is actually the same as the makeup of the vineyard area. So you have 85% Merlot, 10% Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% Cabernet Franc. Now let's give it a proper taste. There's a wine critic, Roger Voss, who works for the Wine Enthusiast publication. Now, he rated this wine 91 points out of 100, which is high praise indeed. And he explains that a touch of Cabernet Franc has brought out perfumes that contrast with the indulgent Merlot. The wine has weight, concentration, and structure. Now, I tend to agree. I find the nose highly perfumed, aromas of violets, lilac even, a lot of red and black fruits, touch of tobacco. Palate's super fresh. There's that impressive 2016 energy that I spoke about earlier. You can feel the tannins, they're there, but they're very well covered by the fruit, not edgy at all. And the finish, very, very long. I think it's a very, very good wine, effortless balance. I think, it's beginning to come in its own now, but will easily age, for 10 years, possibly more. For me, the producer, Clos de Menou, consistently a wine that offers fantastic value for money, particularly when it comes from an appellation where the prices are just really, really high. Excellent value, as I say, $22.80 per bottle. What do you think, Tim? You like that one?
Yeah, I really do. I've had this one a few times, and I think you're right. It's starting to really settle down nicely. It's just got a little bit of bottle age now.
Yeah.
But having said that, this will continue to develop, and I would suggest to people buy a couple of cases, and
definitely
they can open up one every 6 months and see how it develops over the next decade or so. I think again this is a lovely one. It's very, very smooth, but once again, I think if you have got a little platter of nibbles to try the wine, try the nibble, go back to the wine, see how hopefully the whole thing is greater than some of the parts. I see that some of you have been on the first wine, matching it with truffle cheddar. That sounds delightful, from Suzanne. And manchego, lovely sheep's milk, Spanish cheese there, and cheddar, Parma ham. Yeah. So as I said, because these wines are all pretty full-bodied, any mix and match from that list I think would work quite well. So it'd be a bit of fun to see whether you've got the same things and whether they work differently with the different wines, or indeed whether you're trying different things with the different wines. So again, do keep those comments coming in. Delicious. Okay, well, whilst you're contemplating that, let's have a look at the Languedoc-Roussillon region. This is in the southwest of France. The particular domain that we're going to be looking at in a minute covers not a massive area, about 49 hectares, and it's located about 30 kilometers from Carcassonne, which you can see almost in the middle of the map there. And it's a little area called La Lavenière, there just the north of Carcassonne. The region itself, Languedoc-Roussillon, is quite a massive production area, actually. It goes from the Spanish border right the way along to the beginning of Provence, and covers an area of about 2,800 square kilometers. That's just for the area under vines. And it's been the biggest single wine producing region in the world, being responsible for more than a third of France's total wine production. A few years ago, it actually produced more wine than the United States of America.
Wow.
The history goes back even further than the Roman times. This is an area where the Greeks came in with their trade and their vines in the 5th century BC. And along with parts of Provence, these are the oldest planted vineyard areas in the country. The region of Languedoc has been under French rule since the 13th century, and the Roussillon part was acquired from Spain in the middle of the 17th century. And the two regions were joined together as one administrative region in the late 1980s. Interestingly, a lot of people talk about, slightly tongue-in-cheek about the medicinal benefits. I'm just having a little tincture this evening for medicinal purposes only, don't you understand? Well, in the 14th century, the Languedoc had a great reputation for producing really high-quality wine. And in the metropolitan areas of Paris, wines from the Saint-Chinian area were actually prescribed in hospitals for their healing powers. I'm not sure that we'd be able to get such a tincture on the NHS these days. But unfortunately, during the development of the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, production shifted more towards mass-produced, what's called Le Gros Rouge, cheap red wine that could satisfy the growing thirst of the workforce. And they used highly prolific grape varieties, big on yield, low on quality. And these wines, which were a little bit sort of thin and insipid, were often blended with red wine from Algeria, which would give them more body. So the rootstock that was naturally going to be replacing the rootstocks of the vines which suffered from phylloxera in the mid-19th century, which was this little weevil that nibbled away, having come over from America and destroyed virtually all the vines in Europe. American rootstock, it was discovered, were naturally resistant to the phylloxera bug, but they didn't take well to the limestone soil around this particular area. So they experimented with further derivatives of vines. Now, as well as having been previously used to prescribe wine for the hospital inpatients, the Languedoc region was responsible for providing the daily wine rations given to French soldiers in the two world wars. So finally, in 1962, Algeria gained its independence from France. That brought about an end to the practice of blending the stronger Algerian wine to mask the thin Gros Rouge wine. And this coincided with French consumers moving away from the cheaper red wines in the 70s. And that meant that laid the foundations for several decades of surplus wine production in France, with the Languedoc as the largest single contributor to the infamous European wine lake. Bringing it full circle, thanks to some subsidies and changing practices, many Languedoc winemakers started to refocus on high quality, and that's where we are now. We've got a lot of really good value, high quality wines from the region. So let's get stuck into this one. So the domain is biodynamic as well as being organic. Biodynamic is an interesting philosophical type of movement started by Rudolf Steiner in the 1930s. And it basically is a holistic approach to agriculture. And winemakers are increasingly embracing the philosophy of biodynamics. And although if you, at first glance, it seems quite strange, some of the practices and beliefs that they have, with everything governed by cycles of the moon and some very unusual preparations being buried into the vineyards, the proof of the pudding is actually in the drinking, and some very high-end winemakers, including some top Bordeaux producers, are now almost completely biodynamic in terms of how they run things. And if it didn't work for them, then they just wouldn't do it for commercial reasons. So the soils around here, you've got lots of chalk and limestone and gravel, and some of the vineyards in this region are on top of old riverbed stones, a bit similar to what you find in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So the composition of this is 45% Syrah, 45% Grenache, and 10% Mourvèdre. They're aged in new barrels for about 12 months, hand harvested, as I said, organically and biodynamically produced, manually pumped over quite regularly. That's the process of circulating the wine on top of the skins to extract the tannin and colour, which you mentioned earlier. And the result, you've got a lovely, again, powerful bouquet. There's a lot going on. This has got some rich dark fruits. There's almost some sort of dried figs and prunes there. And we've got some Morello cherries, perhaps. Bit of mocha coffee.
The tobacco coming through, I think.
Definitely, yeah. There's a wisp of tobacco and cigar box, I think, certainly. Mm. This is one which has got layers and layers and layers of different sort of textures and aromas. So once again, reiterate, try it, try some food, try it again. This is a one that really goes well with food, and particularly with the food of the region. It's not far from Carcassonne, as I said. You can see that lovely medieval walled city there. The traditional, I don't suppose any of you've got cassoulet on the go, which is traditional sort of sausages, duck and various other things with cannellini beans and a rich, rich sauce. Lovely this time of year, so I can't think of anything better than perhaps a bottle of this and some cassoulet. So it goes well with roast meats, game, strong cheeses. So again, hopefully you've got some of that. Do let me know what you think of it. Time for another poll, I think. Whilst you're contemplating that, let's have a look. Now, I had a picture of Carcassonne there. Carcassonne is a delightful medieval walled city, and it was added to the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites. In what year? 1997, 98, 99, 2000, or 2001? Most of you have expressed an opinion, and I'm going to count you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's your last orders. So the majority of you thought it was 1998. It's actually 1997, if you care. So if you've not been to Carcassonne and you get the chance to go, it's a lovely, lovely place to visit. It's, well, if you can ever imagine being in normality again, let's hope we do. Right, Cal, over to you.
Cheers, Tim. Yeah, so the next wine, it's the 2017 Vigneti del Salento Zola. It's Malvasia Nera, the grape, and it's from Puglia in Italy. Now, Puglia is a long, thin wine region in the far southeastern corner of the boot of Italy. It runs from the very point of the heel to just below mid-calf heights, where the spur of the Gargano Peninsula juts out into the Adriatic Ocean. Now, the heel, which is the Salento Peninsula, occupies the southern half of the region, and it's of great significance to Puglia's identity. Not only are there cultural and geographical differences when comparing the north to the south, but the wine's also different. Where the north is slightly hillier, and more connected to the customs of the winemaking practices of central Italy. The south is almost entirely flat and retains a strong connection with its Greco-Roman past. Now, interestingly, Puglia is responsible for almost half of Italy's total olive oil production and has a long-held reputation as a prolific source of mostly cheaper red wine. Now, this has had a serious economic consequence for Puglia's vine growers and for the reputation of the region's wines. Now, as the world began to demand higher quality wines, the mass-produced blending wines in which Puglia specialise has lost their value. Now, the Puglian solution was to reduce woefully loose yield restrictions imposed in the DOC, which is a kind of equivalent of French appellation system, and essentially to change its approach to winemaking. Now, nowadays, many wine companies now enlist the services of flying winemakers from the New World. And what these do is bring a new focus to the Puglian products. 15 years ago, only a tiny percentage of Puglian wine was actually DOC quality, but that figure is now climbing steadily, and new DOCs within Puglia are being introduced, which will only help quality improve further. Actually, in recent years, Puglia has begun to shake off its reputation for flat, highly alcoholic blending wines and is beginning to seduce the wine world with concentrated inky reds to roll the best from Australia, South America and South Africa. I'm sure this wine's seducing you, Tim.
Oh, yes. Give it half a chance. It's got my name on it.
Now, if we go to the next map, Tim.
It's in the middle of seduction here, Cal.
Yeah.
Sorry. There you go.
There you go. Yeah, so Puglia actually lends itself to division into three rough viticultural areas, which correspond neatly to its administrative provinces. So you have Foggia in the north, you have Bari and Taranto, more in the middle, and you have Brindisi and Lecce in the south. Now, the Malvasia Nera, in the one we're tasting now, is from the Mandorian and Sava communes located in Taranto. And Tim, you'll show them where that is.
There you go.
Excellent. So yeah, as I mentioned previously, the producer of this wine is Vigneti del Salento. And Vigneti del Salento is the Farnese family's venture into Puglia. Now, the Farnese family, they're a very influential wine family in Italy, and they actually own several different properties across the country. Now, experienced winemaker Filippo Bacalaro is the driving force behind this particular label, and he strives to extract rich, ripe flavours of fruit and likes to do so with minimal use of intervention in both the vineyard and the winery, and of course with a lot of know-how. Now, the vintage of this wine, 2017, 2017, sorry, was a tricky vintage in Puglia. The region experienced extremely cold winter, an incredibly hot summer, and yields were down 30% on average. So, a lot of crop, a lot of grapes were lost. A cold and heavy snowfall was followed by really high temperatures in spring and summer, with little rain to relieve the vines. Now, despite these difficulties, winemakers were very, very pleased with the overall quality of 2017. I think you can certainly tell the quality coming through in this particular wine. Now, with regards to the winemaking, the Malvasia Nera grapes, they're hand harvested from old bush vines. They're brought to the winery where they're gently pressed and cooled to 10 degrees Celsius for a maceration period, with regular pumping over to aid extraction of colour and tannins and overall flavour developments, which we previously touched on. Now, yeast is then added to kickstart the alcoholic fermentation. Now, this also takes place under temperature control conditions. After this is done, the wine is then aged in a mixture of French and American oak barrels for 8 months before bottling. Now it's time for a proper taste, Tim. So the colour, it's very intense ruby colour. The nose very intense and inviting. Get hints of cherries, notes of clove. Certainly a full-bodied wine, but quite soft. The tannin on aggressive, complex, but has that freshness which you need. I think let's go back to it. There's a lot going on here. Lovely richness and vibrancy. as I say, for me, Tim, you can really taste the sun's energy in the wine, but you still have that freshness that underpins the kind of richness and really creates that lovely balance, which every winemaker is after, and what every consumer is all searching for in wine. Very interesting, really, really high quality, and I think very, very good value at £14.50. What's the verdict, Tim?
I love that. I love the extra sort of layer of richness you've got. Alan and Andrea said it tastes like a sherry and port combo, and I can see where they get that. Actually, there's that really rich dark fruit that
kind of maybe slightly raisin character as well.
Yeah, that's right. Which
dried fruits, yeah.
Because the Malvasia grape is also used in
in Madeira, yeah.
Madeira, that's right. So you've got that nods in that direction of the sort of sherry and fortified flavors.
Yeah.
Okay, so right. Well, that was I thought great. Everyone's getting that sherry thing. Okay, so shall we have another poll? Let's have another poll. Actually, I'm going to, this is about South Africa. So we're going to go to South Africa now. And you can see the tip of the Cape. The area that we're going to is Swartland, which is about 25 miles north of Cape Town. You see some interesting sort of British names there, like Worcester, and it's Malmesbury, which is also just over there. So a lot of, as well as the sort of Dutch influenced names as well. So it's been an interesting historical development from over the centuries, with different countries being involved administratively. What I'd like to know is, when was the first vineyard planted in South Africa? 1645, 1655, 1665, or 1675? Certainly in the 17th century. And I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the winner this evening was 1665. Actually, it was the second answer, 1655. Yeah. The development of the area actually came about with the nomadic people from Namibia originally settling there. Then in the 17th century, it was the Dutch who brought trade and vines and indeed unrest to the region. Subsequently, the British then transformed the area into basically the Cape's breadbasket. So vines were only developed there again once more, much more recently. The geology has produced a mixture of shale, sandstone and granite soils, and the Atlantic Ocean gives a nice sort of cooling effect, which is almost like air conditioning for the rather otherwise hot and quite dry climate there. The particular vineyard that we're looking at there, which there's a picture of it, is unusually completely self-sufficient in terms of irrigation. Because of the high clay content in the subsoil. Cal mentioned that was one of the other areas around Centum. You've got the ability to retain moisture when you do get some rain. So it means that the vines get able to dig down and get their moisture and their nutrients, which are held in the subsoil, as opposed to having to rely on irrigation. The other interesting thing about these people here, who are farming and producing the vines, they once again take a nice, interesting, holistic view, although it's not biodynamic. They want to reduce, as a lot of winemakers do these days, their reliance on pesticides and herbicides, and try and get a naturally more eco-friendly balance between all the plants, the flora and the fauna to kind of coexist. So this particular vineyard, they use lupins and radishes, which are planted to uplift the soil composition, and it helps reduce the compaction, improves the overall soil health, and it means that extra little bit of microbial activity reduces the need for herbicides, because you've got kind of natural predators keeping the balance of the vineyard much more sort of effortlessly in check, rather than relying on swathes of chemicals. So they refrain from using harmful pesticides and herbicides, and it's a far, the diversity is improved a lot better, and there are no sort of imbalances, fingers crossed, between different species of insects there that would otherwise possibly upset the equilibrium. Right, now this grape is the Mourvèdre, and there's a picture of it there. You can see it is a thick-skinned grape, and it needs to be because of the amount of sun and heat and dryness that you get there. So this is 2016 Spice Root, and back in the 1990s, a gentleman by the name of Charles Back came across what was originally an old tobacco farm here. He investigated the soils to understand the geological kind of patchwork in the area, which was obviously going to be the foundation for the vineyard. And so he discovered that the conditions were ideal for planting the Mourvèdre grape. The harvest was hand harvested, and it was quite a late ripening vintage. The grapes were de-stalked and lightly crushed. We talk about de-stalking. So if you manually harvest grapes, if you think back to one of the very early slides we looked at with a cross-section of a grape, and you can see the stalks, you get a lot of very astringent tannin from the stalks. If you don't really want the stalks in as part of the fermentation process, but obviously it's quite labor intensive if you've got to manually sort through and make sure you get rid of it. So one of the things about wines that are carefully made generally is that they will apply a lot more manual intervention and time into preparing the best possible condition for fermentation, rather than chucking it all in the tank. Okay, so once again, the punch downs that we were talking about to get the extraction going, those were also done manually. Fermentation lasted for about 7 days, after which the wine was pressed off the skins and transferred to seasoned French and American barrels for this malolactic fermentation to take place. Further 14 months maturation in these barrels. And so let's grab the sample now, which should be nicely opened up. You've got aromas of black cherry there. And on top of that, you've got slightly spicier things like a bit of nutmeg and maybe cardamom. Signature black and red fruits. Now, Mourvèdre is known as a very thick-skinned grape, one which will naturally produce quite a lot of tannin. And in fact, the French have a kind of slang expression for that called "on tringle chien," which means the dog strangler, get you by the throat. But people are learning how to make sort of more friendly Mourvèdre that doesn't need to have too many years now. In the old days, if Mourvèdre wine was made, you'd have to put it away for about 10 years before the tannins would have mellowed sufficiently to not sort of take the enamel off your teeth. The tannins are pleasant here. I think they are definitely noticeable, but they're well integrated with this lovely, rich, dark fruit. So again, back to the comparison, have a sip, try a little nibble of something, preferably with some protein there. Go back and try the wine again, and you'll hopefully see how how the evolution of the sort of proteins and tannins will alter the balance. Now, Richard said, so where in France does Mourvedre hail? Because of the extreme heat under which it thrives, and actually requires a lot of sun and a lot of heat, it's no surprise to learn that the kind of go-to area for Mourvedre is right in the south of France, in Provence. And in fact, there's an area called Bandol, which is roughly between Toulon and Marseille, if you know the geography of the south of France. It's on the coast. And Bandol is quite a small appellation, and the vast majority of the red wines there contain Mourvedre, to the extent of about 85% of the blend. If you like this type of wine, yeah, do dig out some Bandol, because they're absolutely fabulous. Low yielding, again, hand harvested. It's not an easy grape to manage, so you won't find it sprouting up everywhere. But well worth the effort, I think, if you like that full-bodied flavour, which will go extremely well with well, whether it's steak or whether it's venison casserole or a really well-aged hard cheese. Yeah. What do you think about this one, Cal?
Really good, Tim. Certainly a big wine. The tannin are there, but like you say, they're pretty polished, really. But I can imagine eating this, particularly in South Africa, proper massive steak. I think it'd work perfectly. But really good, very well balanced, and yeah, impressed. Good selection.
And a bargain, I think.
Certainly.
Right. Well, spicy, says Thomas. Yeah.
There you go.
So yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Somebody, Clem, said just tried it with cashew nuts and tasted delicious. Yeah. Do try your own experiment. It's probably that little bit of saltiness and maybe it's a little bit of fat in the cashew nut. That would probably work extremely well. Yeah. Okay. Well, I've got one more poll for you before our next little bit of news, which is hopefully a bit easier. And I've remembered this time to make it multiple choice, so you can tick more than one. So which wines did you particularly enjoy today? You can tick more than one. As long as you tick something, that's good. It's nice to see everyone getting a little bit of, all the wines getting a bit of support here, which is good. It's always a little bit of a leap, not into the unknown, and a leap of faith for us when we're picking the wines, because with a couple of thousand wines in stock, you want to make sure that we cover a sort of range, but equally you want to make sure that we don't have anything that's so far out that people think, what on earth was that?
I feel bad for the Mourvedre. It's not on there.
I beg pardon, Carol?
I feel bad for the Mourvedre. It's not an option. That's mean, Tim. On the poll.
We've got, yeah, it is.
Is it? Oh, must be my
eyes.
Could be my eyes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they've all got. Okay, you've pretty well all voted there. That's good. Thank you for that. I'll just share the results there. So hopefully you can all see that.
Yeah, see that.
Yeah. So there's a nice spread there. I think the favourite this evening, marginally, was the Minervois from the biodynamic southwest France. I certainly think there's some fabulous wines coming out of there, and they're slightly off the beaten track in terms of what would you imagine to jump out of you? That's why we like to sort of explain to people about the winemakers and what their philosophies are and how they put the things together. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
So nice with walnuts. Yes, walnuts. I'm glad some of you have taken to some walnuts, because walnuts have got tannin in them, particularly on the skin. So if you don't blanch them and you leave them with the skin on, it gives you a nice little grip. And of course, all these wines will work well. It's a really nice nibble to have. So what have we got coming up? Well, in the 10th of December, well, next week, we've actually got a sold out port event. So you can't come to that if you haven't already got a ticket. But we've got a stunning lineup for Verity wines. It's not cheap, but the wines that we're showing would cost about 300 quid a bottle. So if you fancy finding out what they taste like, then that's actually quite good value. And we're finishing off the year with last public tasting, which is port on the 18th of December. We've actually got corporate events coming out of our ears now, as people are coming to us for their virtual office parties, which they can't have in the flesh, so to speak, and a good thing too. So if we've still got a few slots left, if any of you are interested in having a kind of virtual Christmas party, given that we're now, most of us, in tier 2 or 3, unless you're in the Isle of Wight, the Isle of Scilly or Cornwall. So we've also got some dates already now for the new year. From Classic Selection, we're doing a Burns Night whiskey as well, and then we've got variously Southern Hemisphere, cheese and wine, Old World Gems, Burgundy, Spanish Delights, and the Loire Valley. And that takes us up to, dare I say, vaccination time.